Welcome to Season 2 of Garth and Sue Talk, a series by Psych Sessions where we bring up a topic of conversation and then we just riff. These are the water cooler conversations that you have with colleagues in your department. These are the chats you might have at the bar after a good day at a teaching conference. So please, pull up a seat as we talk about teaching. Sue Franz, welcome to Season 2.
Garth Neufeld, it's great to be back.
Yes, it is. And today we are going to talk about tilting. That's what I told you we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah, that was one of the options, and that's a perfectly fine topic. We have a lot of episodes here in this season, so we might as well go ahead and start right there.
All right, fantastic. I first heard about tilt, I think almost 2 years ago. I think it was spring 2019. Spring 2019. Somebody on our campus was talking about this at a faculty assembly, and we did a little exercise. And then by fall 2019, we brought in kind of an expert on it who ran us through a workshop on tilting. And then I've just adopted it and loved it ever since. And I tilt everything. I haven't thought about how to tilt this podcast, but we'll figure it out. So how about you? Where did you learn about or hear about tilting?
You know, I don't know. It has been a topic of discussion for our campus now for a little while, and it makes total sense. So I don't think we've said what tilting is.
Oh, we're not going to say it.
We're not going to say.
Yeah, we're just going to use it as a verb and not explain it.
Okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So I keep picturing tilting at windmills. So this is not that. This is no. And you've certainly had much more training on it than I have. I think I just went and read a website.
Well, this is the thing is that, and I think it's funny now how far we're going without explaining what it is. But I think the thing about tilt is when I was sitting in there, I thought, well, obviously, I mean, it's not like it's complicated, right? No. It's not complicated at all. It makes total sense. So you've heard about it. Maybe it's made its way through the Washington Community College system. But it's big now. It's big.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. So for everybody who is completely confused at this point, you can go ahead and hit pause on the podcast and go to tilthighered.com and go ahead and get lost in the website there. It's not a really complicated system, as Garth said, so pretty easy to implement. It's all based on the idea that adult learners are a little different than child learners, although it seems like explaining to children what you're doing would also be nice. So it's transparency in learning and teaching is what TILT stands for, transparency in learning and teaching. When we create assignments, ideally, we have some idea as to why we are giving the assignment. And here the idea is that we let students in on it. That's it.
Right. That's basically it. Okay, so one of the things that we did at the workshop was we were charged to bring in one of our assignments from our classes, and we didn't get much more information than that. Just, hey, bring in an assignment that you would give to students, and then they paired us off cross-discipline. So I was getting a chemistry assignment, and that chemistry professor was getting my psychology assignment, and then we had kind of a question and answer sheet or something like that, where it was like, what questions do you have reading through this person's assignment? The idea here is that we have looked at our own stuff so much that it may not occur to us how this comes across to students. And so that was really, really eye-opening for me, because I think I did better than my partner, by the way. So I felt pretty good about that. But I can get lost in the words. I never want to be a barrier to my students' learning. And I found that this was kind of a mirror, held up a mirror for me to figure out if that was the case in some situations.
It really forced me, because I've done the same thing. I have tilted all of my assignments. And what I really love about it is that it's not being forced on students. So my assignments, most of them are divided into the purpose for the assignment. So here's the background. That's where I also bring in the student learning outcomes for the course, what the task is. So here's what you got to do. And then the criteria. Here's how it's going to be scored. And then for most of my assignments, the bigger assignments, I also have a pro tips section and an FAQ section. So for students who don't care about the background, they're not interested in that, they just want to go directly to the task, they can. That they're not being forced to read the background. But for those students who want to know, why in the world am I doing this, that's available to them. And it really forced me to think about, okay, I've got this assignment. Why do I have this assignment? And I'm happy to say that at this point, I have managed to scrub from my courses assignments that I've inherited from previous instructors who were kind enough to loan me their courses. And so I didn't have to think about, well, why am I doing this particular assignment? If it's gone, it's not there anymore. So it was a nice exercise, though, for me to really stop and think about what I'm doing, what it is I want students to walk away with, and why.
Yeah, I like that. I like that purpose statement at the beginning of these assignments. So, and this is the TILT model. It's, tell students the purpose of the assignment, tell them what they need to do. That's the task. And then tell them how they're going to earn points for it. Really simple. So simple. Anyway, the purpose, what I liked about it is that even, let's see, I'm in mid-career now. I accept it. But in my early career, I think that I didn't always know, and like why I was having students do something, especially in a course like Psych 100, which is so big. I think this is related in some way to content. Probably, I'm thinking this is related to backward design. We could probably go there. It's related to, it's all one thing. But coming back to purpose makes you reflective on why you're having students do this before you have them do it. And that, again, that was supposed to be sound more like complex than it came out. But I can't believe that I didn't do that from time to time, or ever, maybe early on. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like, why? What's the purpose of this assignment? Well, the purpose of this assignment is either to meet this outcome, or the purpose of this assignment is this theme that I've been telling you about the whole course. It does give you that opportunity. So I cut you off. Go ahead.
I think some instructors will do that when they introduce the assignment to the class, that they'll say something like, so you're going to be writing this research paper, and here's what I want you to get out of it. Or this is why I'm asking you to do it. I think some instructors have some idea as to what they're after and are happy to communicate that to students verbally. Under those circumstances, I don't know to what extent students are actually able to focus on it, because they might be so freaked out about, okay, how long does this paper need to be? How many resources do I need? Are you going to count grammar? What are we doing here? That they're not really thinking about the bigger picture. So having that in writing where students can go back later and actually look at it, I think really helps them. And I have found that an intro, so for my weekly assignments, these weekly inner teaching assignments, I found for the purpose, I was actually talking a lot about why are we even covering this content? Why is this content important in psychology? And then what do I want you to do with this content?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just about to say it's the why, right? And students in order. I was just reading an article this week about engagement, and if in fact, the brain engages best for learning if there is a why, if some reason, and then learning happens better if you can establish that, because it's the beginning of, it's the root of engagement. And so that why could be I suppose a why could be because it meets this learning outcome 3.2, but that's not as engaging to me. The why that I want to put there is, I don't know if short or long matters, but I'd love to have something short, a purpose statement at the beginning of an assignment where a student can look at it and I can say something like, and this is off the top of my head, but we're going to answer these questions because I want you to be able to think critically when you get out into the world and people are making all kinds of claims about things from a scientific perspective. So that could be a very compelling why. And that, I think, sparks a little curiosity for students too.
I agree totally. Framing anything. And isn't that essentially what TED Talks do? That they open with, here's a problem, here's an interesting thing that I observed, here is this interesting result that I got. Now let me go back and tell you the backstory, or let me tell you how I move forward to solve this particular problem. That TED Talks are inherently engaging.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to go off for a little bit and talk about active learning and my pet peeve about the term active learning. Mm-hmm. And we may have already talked about this in a previous episode, in which case my apologies to all listeners. But active learning has come to mean students do something in your class. And my beef with that is that students don't have to do something. They don't have to physically do something in order for it to be active learning. Active learning, all learning by its very definition is active. That anything that requires cognitive energy is going to be, you're going to learn something. And it's very hard to learn something passively. So if you've got an instructor who is a very engaging lecturer, students are going to be engaging in active learning because they're going to be right there on the edge of their seat with this instructor about, okay, and then what happened? Mm-hmm. And then what happened? And then how does that work? And all the active part is going on in the student's head, and it's just the instructor's beautiful lecturing style that has taken them there. Every TED Talk does not include traditional, what we think of as active learning, but for 20 to 25 minutes, people are on their edge of their seats. They are absolutely engaged with whatever the speaker is saying. They are actively learning, but it's not the active learning term.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I know we're on a rabbit trail, but I'm going to continue it. I read a book a couple of years ago called Story Brand. It's all about marketing. And it's about coming up with that one message that you can start to create everything else around. And that's what a good why statement does. So any person who started a successful business knows that whatever your slogan is, or that it's vitally important to selling your product. And in this way, it's the same thing. If you want to sell this product, you better find a way to message it and market it and communicate it to students in an engaging way. One that I've been using lately is, I've used in the past, Psychology Matters, kind of as a jumping off point where I want my students to really understand Psychology Matters. The more recent one is Psychology Makes Your Life Better. And that's one that I'll revisit again and again. I could see that working its way into a purpose statement. So, yeah.
Well, I know we're not ready to talk about the APA Intro Psych Initiative themes, but I think that's exactly what it is that we're talking about now, is that we can use those integrative themes as a way to draw students into the Intro Psych course. That here are these big themes that cut across psychology, and we're going to be encountering them throughout the course, and here is why they're important. This is why they matter.
Yep. And that's coming. I think you and I need to do a little bit more background conversation about it, but I think we're going to hit those pretty quickly. So, okay. So these purpose statements start assignments, and then they get into tasks. I'm going to imagine that for you, the task section of an assignment is probably the longest section, or it's got the most detail. Is that right?
I guess it depends on what you include in the task.
Okay.
So I have a little description of what students need for their first draft. And then I have a little description of what they need for their final draft. And then the actual questions that the students are answering for the assignment, I actually have as a separate download.
Got it. Okay. Well, and but they link to it in that task section, right? And so the task is what you are going to be asked to do as a student, right? And that's the section where we really focus in on. If I was reading your assignment, you were reading mine. This is where the transparency really is. So first, why are we doing this? And then now, what do I need to be doing as a student? So how do you think differently about putting it under this category of task? How has that changed the way that you think about what you're asking students to do? Because before it was just directions, right? That's what I did. Assignment directions, and all this stuff got put underneath it. And now I'm really identifying what is your task.
I guess you probably have made more progress in thinking about that than I have. I largely just took what I already had in my syllabus and dropped it under this task thing, which essentially says, use what you learned from your textbook to answer the questions below for your first draft. Even if you're not sure, go ahead and take a crack at them anyway. That's what I want you to do. Is I want you to do the best you can, work with the material that you have, put it down, and then submit it. Yeah. And then the final draft, use the group discussion, use the lecture recordings. If we're live, use the live lecture. If you're still not sure about something, contact me personally, and then revise your answers.
Right. And by the way, I think one of the reasons why you didn't have like a clear, fast answer when I asked that is because this is, again, tilting things is really obvious. Actually, there's not much to think through. It's about structuring things. It's not about changing everything you've done. It's about structuring it clearly for students. And this is what I love about it is, what if we all tilted things in this order? And by the way, there's a 2013 article that kind of kicked all this off. And let's see if I can say her last name. Marianne Winkelms. I'm sorry, Marianne, if I said your name wrong, but who I think is spelled? Oh boy, yeah, Winkelmes, and yeah, so that it kind of kicked all this off. But if there's a lot of research out there now that says this actually helps students with learning, and it helps students who are underprepared, especially, and if all instructors could do this, could you imagine a student going from class to class to class, a chemistry class to a psychology class to a music class, and they know what an assignment is going to look like? And maybe at some point in an undergraduate experience, maybe juniors or seniors need to be able to walk into different situations and kind of figure that out themselves. But we're dealing with first and second year students, you and I are, and my students need some help with that. And wouldn't it be great if we could give them transparency, some sort of consistent guidelines throughout their college experience, at least as far as we have them?
I think of this in terms of schemas. That if you've got a lot of academic experience, or you come from a family with a lot of academic experience, you probably already have an idea in your head of how assignments work and how tests work and how college works. And if you don't, and if you don't have that kind of support system, you're making it up as you go. So you're going to need more guidance. And I think as faculty, we sometimes fall into this trap of, look, I've told you this 17 times. Well, no, you've said it 17 times, but those were 17 different classes. And I think that it becomes really hard for us to go back to that naive state. And it's a hindsight bias problem, is how I describe it to my students, actually, is that I can't go back to where I didn't know all of this stuff. I can't go back to a time before I first created this assignment and tried to experience it from a student's perspective. So I have to rely on my students to tell me, okay, this doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
And actively soliciting that feedback, especially for really new assignments, is, I think, absolutely crucial. The other thing I want to add to that is that for all students, so let's say that they go to that chemistry class and they see the purpose task criteria, and then they go to your class and they get the purpose to task criteria. Students start to get it into their heads that, okay, for any assignment, what I'm looking for is why I'm doing this, how to do it, and how it's going to be evaluated. And you know what? I think that's going to benefit all students when they're out in the workforce, either in their current jobs or future jobs.
Yeah. And what we're talking about is, you could say it's scaffolding, or you could say that it's building a skill. But we have to break things down to like the lowest common denominator, to the basic form, in order to teach students this stuff. So I do not have any kind of problem with first and second year classes really assignments looking the same, at least in their structure, because students will start to internalize that, which is pretty cool. Okay, criteria is the third part. This is where I put either a rubric, or I just tell students how they're going to earn points or not.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I used to actually, under criteria, I just now have a short paragraph there that it gives the overarching, and I'm looking at mine right now. That's why I'm pausing. And I see that I need to include more information. I could be much clearer here under the criteria.
Yep.
I state explicitly that part of the score is going to be based, what percentage of the score is going to be based on effort, which is how they do on the first draft, which is just basically, did you try really hard? But I don't have very much after that, other than to say, look at the rubric. And then in the rubric, I have very detailed criteria. And it's a generic rubric that I use for these assignments. And then after students submit the final assignment and I choose what it is I'm going to score for the assignment, then I create a much more specific rubric. So, but the big generic rubric says strong answers will look like this, and so-so answers are going to look like this, and weak answers are going to look like this. So they have all of that in the generic rubric to start. But up here where I give the overview of the criteria, I could be more explicit there.
I mean, I think that's just it. There is just metacognition going on all over the place, right? So what we are actually asking students to do, and you said it, when they're looking at assignments, hopefully in the future, or when they're an employer and they have some task assigned to them, that they're going to go purpose, task, criteria. How do I know if I've been successful at this? But as faculty, this forces us to be very metacognitive with what we're asking them to do, to the point where you just learned something in this moment by just taking a look at it and considering clarity and transparency within criteria. It is this thing that is completely obvious, and yet we miss it all the time. Many of us don't do it. We're just pumping out assignments and grading. Yeah. And
some students, all they're doing is, give me the assignment here, let me go do it. And I know that it frustrates some of my colleagues to no end because the students aren't reading the instructions first. But it makes me wonder that if you give that purpose in advance, it's the very first thing that students see. It's just a few sentences long, that it draws students in. Like, oh, okay, so this is what I'm trying to accomplish with this assignment. So maybe I should look at the instructions to see how it is I'm going to go about accomplishing this.
I know this rubs you and I wrong. You and me. You can use me there. This rubs us wrong when faculty blame their students for doing poorly. Now, sometimes, and we've talked about this a lot, sometimes you want to shift that responsibility to students in certain situations, but sometimes, and I'm going to say more often than not, if my student doesn't know what's going on in an assignment, maybe not my student's fault. maybe it's my fault. Maybe I need to work on that purpose statement or that task, or I need to build in some more scaffolding around my assignments.
I don't know if it's more often than not or not. That's a tough one to say, because the information may be there, but students may be really stressed. They don't have time to think about, okay, what's the real purpose here? No, let me just answer the freaking questions because I got to get to my part-time job, my third part-time job this week. And we do know that, so I don't think we've talked about this either, but an economics professor and I had this conversation several years ago, thinking about grades from an economic standpoint. So if you think of 2.0, a C grade, as the academic poverty line, and some students are operating right at that 2.0, that for them, just getting a 2.0 is going to be good enough because they have all these other responsibilities that we've talked about in earlier podcasts, that they're taking care of all kinds of family members of all kinds of ages, and they're working 3 part-time jobs, and they're doing their best not to be homeless. And so getting that A in your class is really not their priority. Getting a B in your class is not what they're after either. That they're just shooting for a C. They know that if they had more time, and if they had been, frankly, as lucky as I was to go to college, have a part-time job and get lots of financial aid as I did, very thankful to the federal government and the state of Pennsylvania for supporting my education, that I was lucky. And I didn't realize how lucky I was until I'm looking at my students now and how many other responsibilities they have. So here are students who, if they had unlimited time, they would love to get an A, and they probably could. But they're willing, I want to say half-assed, but that's not fair. But what they're willing to do is prioritize my course lower than all these other responsibilities in their life. And while I'm writing all kinds of comments on their paper, encouraging them to do better next time, for them, they're looking at that C going, I'm good. I'm doing enough to get a C, and that's exactly what it is that I'm after.
Yeah.
And that works out fine until something happens in their life, which is the same thing with people who are living right at the economic poverty line, is that as soon as something goes wrong, there is no cushion. So when the car breaks down, now they're going to lose their job because they can't get to work. So the same thing happens here at the academic poverty line, that students are maxed out on their time, but then all it takes is for one thing to happen. They get COVID, a family member gets COVID, something else happens in their life, and they don't have the bandwidth to do anything else in the course. And so where they were with that C now drops to a D or an F, and they don't have a cushion to keep them up there. Students who have A's and they have something bad happen, all right, they drop to a B or a C, and it's okay as far as their academic record goes. But that's kind of the benefit of academic privilege, if you will.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting way to think about grades. I'll be using that somewhere in the future. I think what I meant by it's the instructor's responsibility more often or not, or issue, is when you come to something like TILT, what we realize, and for example, for me, even when I am tilting my assignments, I am realizing in that big part of my assignments, which is the task, where I'm trying to explain exactly what I want, and I want to give you examples, and now it's like a whole lot of information, and then that student comes along and says, I don't have time to read all this. Tell me what I need to do. I just need the basics. Tell me. And I realize that there are moments where everything I say in the assignment might be actually transparent, but it might not be manageable in terms of an amount. And so not only does the messaging have to be transparent, it can't overload students. Yeah. There's only so much students can take in an assignment prompt, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it makes me wonder about judicious use of bold. So for those of you who are skimming, read this sentence, and this sentence, and that's enough to get you going. But there's more here if you want the more. Or maybe at the very beginning, there's a TLDR, too long, didn't read. Here's a little paragraph for you, or an executive summary paragraph. But something that's just, you absolutely got to know this. And then here is the background if you want that, or the fleshed out version if you want that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, folks, I think that one of the best things you can do for your assignments is go through them. Actually, I don't think it takes that long just to redo them in this way. You're shaking your head in agreement with me that to go purpose, task, criteria is a really nice way to organize your assignments, especially if you haven't thoughtfully done that across your curriculum. But I also want to talk about tilting other things. Are you ready for me to move us off the assignment conversation? Or do you have anything else to talk about with regards to tilting assignments?
I don't think I have anything else, but I reserve the right to come back if need be.
You know what? You can have that right. Okay.
Okay.
So here's what I learned about tilt. After I was able to work it into my classes, I realized that it's a really good way to do a lot of stuff in my life outside of just the classroom. I think it has, and I'm not talking, I'm going to stick within higher education right now, but sometimes when I run meetings now, I think differently about the meetings. And, you know, I mean, you all know what it's like to be in a good meeting versus a bad meeting, right? Anyway, I have found that tilting has really helped with that as I think through what is the purpose of this 45 minutes together? What tasks are there that we need to accomplish? What do you think about that?
I would say that if we dove into the IO literature, I think that's exactly what we would see. That anybody who is specifically about running a meeting or a project, that you decide what the purpose is, why are you doing this, what you're going to do, and then how you're going to evaluate it afterwards. And I think everybody out there who's listening with an IO background are like, duh.
Yeah. It makes all kinds of sense. And again, this is a metacognitive practice. I mean, it can happen with 2 minutes before you get into your meeting to take a moment and run yourself through these questions. And actually, these are the skills we were talking about earlier that we want to give our students by showing them a transparent way of building assignments, right? Yeah, but I would
argue though that before the meeting is even scheduled, that the purpose, the task, and the criteria are laid out. At least the purpose is laid out. Maybe the task and perhaps what's discussed in the meeting is criteria. Although if we're just thinking about a successful meeting, you got to have it in your head as to what criteria you're going to use to determine, is this going to be a successful meeting?
Yeah. I am, again, I am impressed by the effectiveness of tilt. People can go dig into the studies. I know that they've been doing studies. They were collecting data for years, and I don't know if that final study came out more recently than that 2013 article, but the early research did show that it had all of these benefits, and so it's unbelievable how just something so simple can have such profound benefits. And again, I don't know. I guess we'll kind of end this conversation where we started, which is duh. Like, of course you should. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about this?
I think in some cases, so this research is coming out of research with adult learners. And the idea is that if you're 25, 30, 35, 40, you kind of want to know a little bit more about why you're doing this. So is this busy work? And I think that's what it is that we're trying to get around. That okay, students, really, this is not busy work. There's a purpose behind this. There's a rationale for doing it. And this is what I want you to do. And this is how you're going to be evaluated on it. It's not just to give you a grade, that you really are doing something.
Well, thanks for taking the time once again. And tilthighered.com, is that where people should go check this out?
tilthighered.com.
All right. Until next time.
Thanks, Garth.